Well, welcome tonight. This is our grand finale for the Barrows Conservation Lecture Series this year 33 of our series. And we are indeed honored to be here with Rick McIntyre. Obviously, people love wolves, Rick. We know that. I was lucky to meet Rick years ago, and a number of times I've been with him in the Lamar Valley. And it's fair to say no one's watched more hours of wild wolves than Rick McIntyre for 30 years. So we will learn from that. I mentioned to him a couple of milestones in global and American conservation that so impressed me as I was coming up. One was the Endangered Species Act in '73, saved my American alligator, thank you. But also that led to the release of the wolves in 1995. If they were going to save them, they had to have a recovery plan, and the recovery plan was Rick, Doug Smith, and others release those wolves. And it was a lot more complicated than that, but it's clearly been a success, and we're here to celebrate it. So, Rick, what I'd start with is, I think, a celebration of what you've done, your work and your science, but also people here know about you. You've made the wolves of Yellowstone famous. People know about Wolf 8, they know about Wolf 21. And, it's not every field biologist who celebrates individual animals, but you've certainly taught us they're not all the same. You can't say this is what every wolf does every time. They have lots of different traits.
Yes, that's a good way to start. Could everyone hear me okay? Is the volume good? Yeah, probably most of you at some point in your life had a dog. And all dogs are a little bit different. There are some similarities, and they get that from their wolf ancestors. So there are some wolves that are super smart, some wolves not so much. And there are some that are very ambitious, and they desperately want to become an alpha male or an alpha female. We had a male wolf, 1048, that didn't care about being an alpha because he was very good looking. And he didn't need any kind of status to get the girls. They came to him. So yeah, it's been 30 years. And of course, it was very controversial. There was no guarantee that it would work. No one had ever really done this before. Wolves have a homing instinct. We brought them down from Alberta, the first batch, then British Columbia, the second batch. And I oftentimes say that there were so many individual people, men and women, that were in critical situations, critical moments, both prior to the reintroduction and during the early years, where each one of them had to make some sort of a momentous decision. And if any of them had made the wrong decision, we wouldn't be here today. It was meant to be that everything that could have gone wrong kind of went right. And when we had setbacks and disasters, the right person was on the scene to make the right decision to kind of bring things back on track. You may remember that one of the father wolves was illegally shot and killed, and it looked like the 8 pups that he had sired were not going to survive. We put them back in an acclimation pen. And then when we released them, a young male, Wolf 8, came along. My first book is about him. And that was the first case we had of adoption, that he felt compassion for those pups. He himself was only a year or so older than they were. So he was very young, immature, very inexperienced, but he was willing to take on that great responsibility. And boy, he did the best possible job. And that included raising the pup that became our most famous male, Wolf 21. So there's just so much to say on that, but I'll turn it back to you.
It really is remarkable. Wolves are famous for a lot of things, but a lot of them are myths. Certainly one myth that people often hear is, oh, the lone wolf. But in reading your books, these are pack animals. far more than they would be by themselves. I think a wolf probably actually doesn't, it's not really built to be by itself.
Yes, certainly, it's totally accurate to say that wolves are social animals. And ironically, one of the proofs of that is you think of their domesticated version, the dog. The dog's greatest joy is to be with its human family. And, the worst punishment you could do to a dog is leave your dog home when you're out on, some good adventure or something. So, yeah, I oftentimes tell people that for a typical pet dog, they see the dad in the family as the alpha male, the mom as the alpha female, and the kids in the family as older siblings or younger siblings. And, certainly the dog would be willing to fight to the death to protect its human family, just as a wild wolf would be very willing to do that same thing. So for them, a normal life is living in a family. For wild wolves, that's its pack. For dogs, it's us. Mhm.
Of course, the other myth that's come from kids' tales and others is the big bad wolf. And I know you don't sugarcoat that wolves are tough; they're tough as heck. Um, in fact, what's the leading cause of death in the park for wolves?
Yes, that's a good thing to get into. So, like people, wolves fight over territory. And we only have room for about 10 packs in Yellowstone. So Yellowstone is 3,000 square miles, one of the largest parks in the world. But a normal wolf family needs around 300 square miles of territory to support themselves. Average pack is 10. The number of elk, deer, bison, whatever, in those 300 square miles normally is fairly accurate to or adequate to feed a family. But when they fight over territory, at times they kill each other, and that is the most common cause of death. The next most common would be, unfortunately, when wolves stray out of the park to be shot or trapped during the hunting season. So a violent death is a pretty common thing for a wolf. By the way, one of our researchers, Kira Cassidy, she's very good at teasing out information from our records, and it's fascinating what she found. Um, as you would expect, if two packs fight and they have exactly the same number of members, let's say 10 versus 10, then 50% chance these guys are going to win, 50% those guys are going to win, unless there's a certain thing going on. If you still have 10 versus 10, if these guys have more older wolves, more veteran wolves, it's pretty certain that they're going to win because they've been in a lot of fights before. They're not going to run away. It would be like in human warfare if you have a bunch of draftees that have never been in a battle, but there's a couple of sergeants that have been through this before. The younger guys will just follow what the older guys did. And a practical example of that, many years ago, one of the packs in Lamar, the father wolf, the alpha male, saw an enemy pack coming into his territory. His mate had just gone into the den, and because of her late pregnancy, she really couldn't help. So all he had were the 11th-month-old pups from the previous year. So one adult and the pups. And what he did was brilliant. Despite that, he just charged forward. But he was especially smart because when he encountered the first enemy wolf, he threw him to the ground, bit him a few times, waited for the pups to come up. They helped their dad bite him. And then he left that guy, went to the next guy, beat him up. The pups joined him, the next guy, the next guy. And the enemy never knew what hit them. They never figured out, well, wait a second. There's only one big guy, and these first graders here, what are they going to do? Yeah. So, yeah, it was a smart move. Yeah. So if you ever have to fight some other zoo staff, yeah.
That's right. Sometimes the wolves get along better probably than people. You probably observed that. So you mentioned these wolves by number, and you don't give them names, and yet some of them are very famous because of your books, because of that story. Um, So maybe choose one of those stories. I know you mentioned 8, you mentioned 21. Uh, to elaborate a little bit on those, or any of the others, 42. You know, they're household names.
Mhm. Boy, there's so much to say. Maybe I'll go over some brief bios. So 8 was the classic underdog. He was the runt of his litter, and his family was brought down from Alberta with the two parents and the pups. And it was also unfortunate, and this oftentimes can be so difficult for young humans, kids. He looked different than everyone else in his family. He just looked like he didn't belong. So his dad was had a shiny black coat, just gorgeous. His mother probably could have won the Westminster Dog Show. She was almost white. And his 4 same age brothers, they were all pups. They looked exactly like their dad. And 8 was this dull, dirty gray color. To be blunt, not very good looking. And he was kind of clumsy, and um, his brothers beat him up all the time. They wouldn't let him feed. He would have to just pick up whatever scraps he could. So he had a tough life. And it's hard a lot of times if you just look different than anyone else. But then everything changed when they were released from their pen after 2 months. He really came into his own. Plus, his brothers had all these other things that they could do, so they were distracted. And then the first really super significant event that I was able to document happened involving him. All of them were goofing around. They were away from their parents. And they suddenly stopped, and the brothers stared into a forest. I couldn't see what was in there, but something was super interesting. They ran in. I could see different animals running back and forth. And then one of the black brothers ran out with an elk calf in his mouth. So that was impressive. It was probably the first successful hunt that they had made. As usual, 8 was the slowest, so he was kind of last in line trying to keep up with the faster brothers. Well, it turned out that that wasn't their calf, because right behind 8 running out of the trees was the grizzly bear that had killed it. And he was gaining on 8. And 8 would look over his shoulder, try to run as fast as he could, but he was not going to be able to outrun the bear. And here's what happened. He stopped. He turned around and he stood up to the grizzly. He was, I don't know, now 60, 70 pounds, and the bear 300-400 pounds, something like that. And the bear seemed confused. It was like, what's the deal? Why is this little guy doing this? There's some kind of a trick here. And plus, the bear could no longer see the wolf that had his calf. So it was kind of like he shrugged his shoulders and said, well, that's just the way it is. And he turned around and left. And by the time 8 joined his brothers, they had finished eating the calf. And they had never seen what the little guy had done, but I had. And that caused me to figure, yeah, there's more to this guy than meets the eye. Yeah.
I know one of your books for young adults is called An Unlikely Hero, and that's about Wolf 8 with those very kinds of stories. Uh, that's intriguing. I know there are times you had told me that because they live in a pack, they have a higher chance of survival. I know you recently went to La Brea Tar Pit and saw even ancient wolf remains.
Yeah, there's a woman professor at UCLA that works at the La Brea Tar Pits. And so she took me on a tour in the back rooms and everything. And, dire wolves have been in the news quite a bit. This was a few years ago before all that. But the researchers told me this great story that for both our gray wolves and the dire wolves back in the Ice Age, 10, 12, 14,000 years ago, they found individuals that had severe skeletal injuries, broken jaws, broken legs, injuries that were so severe that they could not have survived on their own as a professional hunter, killing animals many, many times their size and weight. So the conclusion was both dire wolves and gray wolves, the other members of their packs fed them, kept them alive for years after they essentially were no good to the pack. They were just dead weight, but they were kept alive by their relatives. And that says a lot about wolves, whether gray wolves or the dire wolves. And I've certainly seen that. If there's an injured wolf, the other guys in the pack are happy to share their food with them.
I know you had talked about and told me stories about wolves, like I think it was 21, who, though he grew to be the guy in charge, he was the first one to spend time with and help if he had a weaker sibling.
Yes, when he was still living with his mother and his adopted father, 8, um, one of the new pups born that year was sick. We never quite figured out what was wrong. And I have so much admiration for 21. I think you could say he was the greatest wolf we've ever had. And his mate, 42, the greatest female we ever had. But he had this level of compassion for others. So the sick pup that year, whether because of an illness, an injury, the other pups didn't play with it. So he was really losing out on that social interaction, kind of like 8 had. And I told you that, or I implied that 21 and his brothers and sisters, their father had been illegally shot and killed. That's why when 8 came along, he adopted them. And so you think about a young pup being adopted and having kind of this hero worship of this new male that came in and took care of him, showed him how to hunt, protected him. And I think a lot rubbed off on 21 from his relationship with his adopted father, because just like 8 took mercy on those 8 pups, 21, when he came back from a hunt where he'd be exhausted, tired, he really needed to sleep, he would feed his mother, feed the healthy pups, read his adopted dad, and then he would walk away from them in a straight line to the sick pup, who was all alone, kind of isolated from the other pups. And would hang out with them, give them some food, play with them a little bit. And, you think of what that meant to that pup. 21 would have been the greatest hero in that guy's life. It would be like whatever kid today, the NFL player, NBA player, the kid is sick and the player comes to the bed and spends time with them. It'd be pretty much the same principle.
Now, Rick, there have been a lot of myths about wolves, and of course, through time, it's the alpha male. And I know in old days, up to maybe 50 years ago, that was, oh yeah, that alpha male, he's in charge. But I think you and others, through really long studies in Yellowstone, might have discovered the alpha male may not actually be calling the shots.
Yeah, actually, to give proper credit, it it was a teenage girl, Susan Bragdon. She was, I think it was in Washington State, for a high school project. She volunteered to work at, I think it was Wolf Haven. And the male biologist, back then all biologists were male, and you know how often they screw things up. No offense. But he was a good guy. He was a true scientist. And he said, yeah, we can do that. Why don't you take 2 weeks, come back after school. I'm going to give you a checklist of behavior. I'll help you identify the wolves in the captive pack. And then just write a report at the end. I'll approve it. You'll get full credit. It should be an easy thing to do. So she came every day. She wrote the report, gave it to him. And when he read it, there was a problem, because she clearly said that the alpha female was the leader of the pack and made all the decisions. So he was trying to think, how can I nicely tell her that she was wrong? Because I'm the big shot expert. But he was a good enough scientist that he decided that before he talked to her, he'd go out to the compound, he'd watch the captive wolves an hour or something, just to make sure nothing had changed. And then when he talked to her, he could say, well, I just looked at him and everything. And guess what? he realized he was the one that was wrong. And he was enough of a scientist to give all the credit to her. And so we clearly see that, that as big and tough as any alpha male is, the truth is, that's, that's a nice accomplishment, but all it really means is now you're working for the real boss. Now, are there any husbands that disagree with any of that? You're a married guy, aren't you? Yeah. Uh, uh, and I think the key thing is, as little pups, as they're kind of learning how the world works, like in a lot of human families, they quickly figure out, hey, it's pretty easy to get away with stuff with dad, but don't mess with mother. Yeah. So if a little male pup is acting up, like chasing a smaller wolf or something like that, the mother is going to come over and just grab him on the back and yank him away and teach him not to do that ever again. So the alpha female, the mother wolves, what I would say is they're really attuned to what the pack needs to do. And she knows the best way to do whatever it is. So she makes all the big decisions, especially where to den. And that the male, there's really no other way to say it, that he works for her. Yeah. Mhm.
Well, I know there are many famous stories, many famous animals, and you're going to be here afterwards signing books. But I think, was it 907 that you were telling me about? Yeah, because that's an interesting.
Yes, my most recent adult book, Thinking Like a Wolf, what is it about her? And I'm working on an autobiography now, and I continue her story. And she's directly descended from Eight's family. His mother and his cousin were her ancestors, maybe going back 5 generations. So her mother, who was an uncollared wolf from Molly's pack, left home as a teenager with some of her sisters, and they met some boys from the Blacktail pack. And you know what happens when teenage girls meet teenage boys. So they formed what became the Junction Butte Pack. And that was in 2012. They had pups that year. And then she, along with 3 litter mates, were born the next year. They were all gray. And one of her litter mates was a sister, 969, and they never got along. And they were intense rivals for many, many, many years. And when 907 was very young, the older alpha female died. She was killed by a rival pack. So I think she was only 2 years old, maybe 3. So she took over the alpha position with very little experience, and which meant she kind of, at least briefly, dominated her same age sister. They were rivals for the position, and 907 won out. Her sister didn't get pregnant that year, 907 did. And because she was inexperienced having pups, she went on a hunt too late in her pregnancy. She had a den prepared at Slough Creek, and suddenly she just had to have her pups where she was. And it was a remote location, and no one helped her. It's normal that the other wolves would bring a mother like that food and the pups. I can't say this for sure, but I suspected that her sister was kind of the mastermind of that. That now she was the alpha female, she was the leader of all the males, and they never went to her, never brought any food. So none of them survived. Let me just get out a little sheet. There's some of this stuff is a little complicated, and I want to make sure that I'm saying it right. But the next sequence, let me see if I have that here. Not that. It's a little complicated here. Yeah. Okay, here it is, yeah. No, it isn't. So that's okay. I think I can remember it. So a couple of years oh, yeah, so her sister took over the alpha position, and she was relegated to number 2. But 907 was very good at forming alliances. And here's an interesting alliance. She went to her sister's daughter, her niece, and made some sort of an arrangement. And the two of them overthrew 969. So that's pretty clever, huh? You know, turning a daughter against its mother. And then 969 and her daughter formed an alliance, and they overthrew 907. So the younger one kind of went back and forth as to who she was going to assign to. And so they went back and forth between the three of them several times. And the end result was 907 won the alpha position 3 times and lost it 3 times. And the males just had to deal with that changeover. By the way, her father, 911, died very heroically defending the family from a rival pack. He refused, he fought against 8 wolves by himself. He had the option of running away. He could have saved himself, but if he ran away, they would have been able to follow his scent trail to his family, and that's where the attack would have been, as opposed to him standing his ground against 8 wolves. He fought very valiantly, very bravely. He died of his injuries from the fight, but the outcome was that essentially he saved his whole family. He sacrificed himself. And we didn't know it at the time. It was impressive enough to see him in that fight. But we normally, after a wolf has died, we send a crew out to do an examination. We knew that he was very old. He had a lot of injuries that had accumulated. But there was one thing we didn't know. His lower jaw right here had been broken months earlier. How can a wolf agree to stand his ground to fight 8 wolves if his only weapon was broken? That pretty much defines what courage is. And that brave thing saved his family. 907 was the acting alpha female at that point, and it was getting very close to the mating season, which is in February. And so the pack was in a real crisis mode. They pretty much have to have pups every year or they won't be able to stand up against rival packs. They need those new soldiers to be trained. So 4 eligible bachelors came along from a rival pack, but they were from the pack that had killed the father wolf. They were the enemy. And it was up to 907 to decide how to handle this. And revenge was one option, but what was more important was the survival of the pack on into the future. So she put the differences aside between them and her and invited them to join, and they became part of her pack, and she paired off with one of them as her mate. So a very dramatic situation. She was a practical girl.
That's right.
She kept on having problems with her sister, 969. Her sister died. And then the feuding continued between her and her niece, 1382. And I think what I want to concentrate is what I would say was the most dramatic episode in her life. And there was a lot of drama in her life. My book, Thinking Like a Wolf, has this story in it in more detail. So at this time, which was the spring of the flood, 2022 in Yellowstone, the flood, there were 5 females in the family that got pregnant. That included 907, who was number 2 in the hierarchy, number one, her rival, 1382, who is quite a bit younger, and then three other young adults. And I think it's fair for me to say that 1382 was now acting as a bully toward the old 907. And I think 907 just decided that she wasn't going to put up with this anymore. I think she also knew in a straight out fight she could not defeat her rival. She was getting very old now. So here's what she did. We've never had a wolf do this before, never since. It all started when we saw her go to one of her pups, pick it up in her mouth. She walked off to the south with it in her mouth, holding it above the water. She swam, Slough Creek, swam the Lamar River, crossed the road, and put the pup in a den on the south side of the road. The traditional den is to the north. And then she carried all of her other pups there. The younger mothers saw her do it, and they imitated her actions. And we got a count of 15 pups that had been carried to the south. The alpha female stayed north with her pups. We worried that this was a bad decision because the hunting parties in the family, they were used to leaving the den to the north, go west, kill something on the north side of the road, and then come back to the den. It was a pretty easy way for them to travel back and forth. They didn't go south of the road very often. If they did, they'd have to deal with the hassle of all the people and everything. So we felt this was a really serious mistake, and it was going to result in probably no survival of the pups. How 907 predicted this, I don't know, but that spring and summer, most of their kills were south of the road. So they would make the kill, they'd feed, they'd bring the food just a mile or two, an easy trot to the east, give it to 907, her pups, the other mothers, their pups. And they'd be so tired at that point, after playing with the pups for a little bit, they'd take a long afternoon nap. And thinking, boy, it would be such a hassle crossing the river, the road, we have to deal with all the people. The mother wolf up there is crabby, she's going to be mad at us. And so let's just take the easy way out of this, yeah. And to sum up a lot of details, all 15 of those pups survived, and none of the pups to the north survived. Yeah. And by the time that younger former alpha female joined the main group, she was relegated to almost the omega position, the lowest ranking one. Yeah. So it was a brilliant thing. And if I could just add one more thing. When I was running this up, I kept on thinking, there's a phrase that describes this, but I couldn't quite think of it. And then I remembered it. Have you ever heard the phrase, they voted with their feet? And that's exactly what these wolves did. The ones that weren't the alphas, they didn't like the old alpha, the young alpha, they liked the young ones, so they voted with their paws. And of all people, you'd never guess who said that. It was Lenin, not John Lennon, the other Lenin. So when the communists were laying siege to the Tsar's Winter Palace, there was a stalemate, and his palace guards had a secret meeting, and they decided to switch sides to go over to the communists. They literally voted with their feet. They walked away from the palace to Lenin's side. And so that's what the wolves did. Quite a story, huh?
It is. And thinking like a wolf. Now, Rick, everybody's hearing these stories and they know of you and it sounds romantic, but give a brief glimpse into what a day in the life of a wolf biologist looks like, including what it might be in inclement weather.
Okay. In the summer, much to my objection, I have to set my alarm at 3:15. I remember in high school, I would sleep till 11 a.m. And so I had to change my schedule because the wolves are most active in the morning hours. And it's about a half an hour out to where they den. So I have to, the amount of time I need to get up in the morning, eat, drive, I have to time it. So I'm there, which is the Slough Creek area, at what we call first light. which is roughly a half an hour before sunrise. Because again, that's when the wolves are doing stuff. If you get there too late, you're going to miss it. And then they like to take naps in the middle of the day. So for most of my years, especially when I was working as a biologist for the park, for the wolf biologist, yes, a wolf biologist, I would work a split shift. So I would take a nap in the afternoon and then get back out 6 p.m. till it got dark, like maybe 10, something like that. I finished up with the Park Service in 2018 to write the books. And then I kind of switched to just going out in the morning. But I have a lot of friends and colleagues that do go out later in the day. And so they tell me what's going on. So I get reports from reliable people. And I just donated to our archives my 13,400 pages of typed notes of everything that I've seen over the years. I think I might have mentioned to some of you that I'm about to have my 10,000th day in the field.
Now, but you're also about to take a Hollywood turn, I think. Is a film being made about the wolves?
Yes, I'll explain where we're at. So we got a lot of interest from the Hollywood people, especially on my first three books, where the main characters are 8, 21, 42, and 302. So we actually had a bidding war. And I had already been contacted by a screenwriter, Zach Stentz, and I got to know him, and I was very impressed with him. He wrote some of the Marvel movies, and ironically, I thought that was a pretty good background for writing about the wolf drama. They're all superheroes, yeah. And so he and his brother wrote the screenplay. They allowed me to have comment on it. It has 4 hours of material, so it could be 2 theatrical movies or a 4-hour miniseries. There'll be an actor playing me, an actor playing my boss, Doug Smith, who was the head of the Wolf Project when I was there. And Doug and I have a Native American friend, John Potter, who comes down and does native blessing ceremonies for the wolves. So he'll be in it as well. It'd be a fictionalized version of me. And guess what? I get a fictional girlfriend. Uh-huh. Do any of you men have any fictional girlfriends? Uh-huh. Uh-huh. And because I have these children's books, I've done a lot of talks for young kids. And boy, I figured out the best possible thing to get them going. So when I come to this part of the story about having a fictional girlfriend, I have a dramatic pause. And then I say, I hope my fictional girlfriend is going to be Taylor Swift. And boy, the kids just explode. Yeah. And
That'd be perfect.
in the script, this is actually true. The fictional girlfriend has a bad ex-boyfriend, and I get to beat up the bad boyfriend.
Oh, there you go.
So we'll hire Taylor Swift, and she has that NFL player boyfriend.
Yeah, there you
So
go.
guess who I'm going to get to beat up?
Travis. Travis Kelce, watch
He doesn't
out.
look so tough to me.
Yeah. Well, we look forward to that, and the working title is
Empire of the Wolves. And the wolves will be CGI.
okay.
So it will look exactly like the real wolves.
Hold your mic.
Boy, I don't mind telling you this. When I came to the end of the script.
Hold your mic up.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Yeah. Thank you.
That's good.
He knows what he's doing. I don't. The climax is 302's story. If you've read the book, 302 was a bad boy for almost his entire life, a very bad boyfriend. But at the end, he totally turned his life around and became one of our greatest heroes. And the story of his death, he sacrificed his life to save his family. Mm-hmm. And it couldn't be more dramatic. And I was in the middle of all of that. I helped carry him out. And they changed some of the details in a minor way. It doesn't matter. But boy, I came to that part at the end where the dramatic way that they pictured his death, how we carried him back. And it is true that there was a whole giant crowd of people that knew him well. and they came to pay
Mhm.
his respects. And I came to that part and I was just crying. Yeah, it's very emotional. So hopefully it will be made, and I think it will, boy, be the best thing ever for wolves. Not
Yeah.
because of me, but because of the stories, but because of what the wolves did.
Well, it's a great series of stories. It really is, and that's what's going to make the script. And we are delighted you're here. I said to Rick, this is the largest group ever in this room. This building's 19 years old, and that's a tribute to the popularity of wolves and their understanding of the wolves of Yellowstone. Before we take some questions, I know it felt like when the idea of releasing wolves, super controversial, but over those 30 years, it'd be impossible to say that it's not super popular. I mean, Yellowstone has what, 5 million visitors a year?
Yes, and I mentioned to them that Montana State University did a recent study where they asked Yellowstone visitors, why did you come? And what sort of money are you spending when you're here? And so many people said, I came to see the wolves, that scientifically, when they published their paper, they said that having wolves back in Yellowstone is generating $82 million every year. And a lot of that is creating jobs. So many of my friends are wildlife guides. It's a great job to have. The money is good. You're with nice people. Um, so that was unanticipated.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, people that are against wolves, they cite an economic argument. Now the economic argument is on our side.
That's right. So let's do this. Let's do some questions. We have such a big crowd. That'd be great. I know we have a microphone so people can be heard. If maybe we'll make that available and have fun with it. If you have a thoughtful question for Rick, here's your chance.
And I'm going to run around the mic because we have a lot of people watching online and watching the recording. So we'll need you to ask the question in the microphone. I see a couple hands over here, and I'll try to make my way around this very crowded and excited room. I'll come up here next and then to you. First question.
How do you catch and collar the wolves? And how do you, yeah, that's my question.
Thank you for asking. So the question was, how do we capture and collar them? Normally, I'm involved as the spotter. You need a lot of training to operate the dart gun. So we bring in a helicopter. And for many years, he's retired now, but Doug Smith was our darter. So he would be strapped in the helicopter. They take off the passenger side door. So he steps on the landing gear. So he would be out like this, taking aim at the rear end of the wolf. That's the best place to aim. And then hopefully gets the dart in there. And it takes a few minutes for the dart to take effect. Lands, they do an examination, put the collar on, make sure the animal is okay. They watch it for a while from a distance and then go on to the next one. If you come back as a wolf, I can tell you how to avoid getting a dart in the rear end. Would you like to know the trick? So here's the trick. Don't run away from the helicopter, run under the helicopter and they can't get you. Yeah. But I've often wondered, let's say there's a yearling male, kind of a teenager, and his dream is to be a big shot adult like his dad, the alpha male, and he worships his alpha male father. And he can't help but notice that the big difference, other than size, between him and his dad is the symbol that his dad is so important and such a big shot that he has this thing around his neck. Yeah, that means he's really important. And then one day the young male is chased by what looks to him as a giant bird, and he wakes up and suddenly, hey, look what I got.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We have another one over here.
There we go.
Okay, it's a two-part question, Rick. The first part follows up exactly on her question, which is, I'm trying to understand, picturing you out there at 3:15 in the morning or whatever, and how are you able to tell what wolves you're looking at unless you are looking at like a computer model with the collars, or like, are you able to identify many of them by sight? And how did you learn how to do that over the years with all these wolves? And the part two is, how did you decide which wolves to feature in the books? There's so many wolves in all the stories. And so I'm really curious, when you sifted through all the stories, how hard it was
Yeah,
to winnow it down to the handful that
Sure.
became sort of the star wolves of the books.
sure. Thank you. So let's see, your first question was, how do we pick the wolves to be collared? Was that correct? Oh, identify. Yes, yes, yes. So we start with the issue that half of our wolves are black, half are gray. So you figure out which are the black ones. An average pack is 10. So let's say there's 5 blacks, 5 grays. All black wolves have some sort of a white blaze in the chest. I think pretty much all black dogs do too. So, and the blaze can be in a different shape. It can be somewhat round. It can be vertical, horizontal. Um, as wolves, as black wolves age, like some people do, they start to turn a little gray in different places. Some wolves have a limp, most of them don't. Some wolves might have a scar or an injury. Some kind of have goofy personalities. Some are always serious. Some are aggressive to the other wolves. Others are playful with other wolves. But we work together. Now, when I was a wolf biologist for the Park Service, I had the telemetry equipment. So each caller gives off a different frequency. So you know for sure which ones are there. I don't really consider myself that good compared to other people at identifying uncollared wolves. So for example, there's 2 younger biologists that have my old job, Taylor, a woman, and Jeremy, a young man. So oftentimes I'm with them and I'm all the time saying, Jeremy, who is that? So, I don't mind admitting that it is hard to tell them apart. And then some of our regular visitors that come back over and over again, they're better than I am. So it's always a group effort on our part. That just like wolves live in a pack and it's a group effort for them, so we kind of imitate that. And it's fun for me to see how it brings together married couples, families. They start to spend all their vacations there. There's a couple from Kansas where for decades he worked in a tire factory that he hated. And on the weekends, he had a pack of dogs and he would go out and chase to kill coyotes. His wife wanted nothing to do with that. So it wasn't an ideal relationship. They started seeing the wolves. He got rid of all of his dogs, never killed another coyote, and uses his skill at seeing what animals that he would have shot years ago to find wolves for us. And so he's one of the best spotters. So it was a great improvement in their marriage. Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
The second part of that question was, how do you decide which wolf is the one to feature in some of your
We
stories?
would always like to get, which wolf? We'd always like to get the alpha pair because the others want to be with the leaders. And other than that, it's probably just the easiest ones to get. So the smarter wolves, they're good at hiding from us. I don't want to say the dumber wolves, but the ones that maybe don't think through things, that like they'll just stop and look at it. But we need all types. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Uh-huh.
I'm sure my wife will say to me, you talk too much. However, you're a fascinating man. And a similar talk I heard some years ago was about the 1933 extermination of the wolves in the park and the economic consequences and the environmental consequences that came from that. The unchecked growth of the elk and deer population that chewed off all the young trees, soil erosion that came, the mud that flowed into the rivers, killed the fish, etc. So do you see a trend or a timeline that says that the reintroduction of wolves has indeed had things that maybe we can't count as dollars and cents?
Yes.
And the only other comment I would ask you is, you said that the economic tide has turned because of the enormous amount of ecotourism. Are the ranchers on the outskirts of the park still as opposed to the presence of the wolves there as they used to be? Thank you.
So the first part of the question was roughly, is it fair to say, how has the park changed now that the willows are back? Yes, thank you for asking that. So I started in '94 before the reintroduction. So I was there to see personally the overpopulation of elk. It was maybe 5 to 10,000 more than what should have been there. So and this extended to the first few years when the wolves had already been put down. It took a while for all the effects to come in. But some of you may be familiar that aspen, which is a very valuable food for wildlife, aspen reproduce from their roots. And so I would, I guess twice a week, I would take people on a hike to an aspen stand. And the adult trees, they only live about 100 years. So the adult trees were dying, but every single shoot, like 10,000 of them that were coming up from all the roots, every single shoot had been browsed to death by the overpopulation of elk. I had a volunteer that was working for me in the early years, an older ranger that had retired, and he worked in Yellowstone in the 60s. And you're going to find this a crazy story, but he said, and I had heard this from other people, that he was issued a rifle, a ranger, and told, hey, in the winter, whenever you can, just go out and shoot as many elk as you can. That was their elk management program. And then later rangers came along, biologists came along and said, well, what you guys need to do is to bring back the wolves. You know, they did kill them off in 1923. I'm sure they congratulated themselves as a great accomplishment, but we can look back and see it just totally messed up the balance of the park. So now we feel that the elk numbers are about the right level for the vegetation that's there. The elk and the bison tend to be moving along as they graze, and the numbers are just the right level so that the grasses aren't damaged. It's just kind of the tops that are chewed, like kind of if you were mowing it. And what was the other part of your question?
The conflict between the ranchers around and that proposed reintroduction.
Yes.
Now that other people are making
Yes.
livelihood and making
Mm-hmm.
money off of this,
Mm-hmm.
has the opinion of the ranchers changed at all?
So to sum up his questions, it was somewhat along the lines, have the ranchers and the neighboring people outside Yellowstone changed? Just maybe to a certain degree, but there's still a lot of opposition. And it's somewhat rare for the Yellowstone wolves to ever leave the park, and even rarer that they would ever kill livestock. It's very inconsequential. But the state does have a program that will compensate ranchers and farmers if there was a legitimate loss. They have experts, kind of a CSI type team that will go in and say, yes, wolves killed it. Or they'd say, well, do you have a neighbor that has a dog maybe the size of a German Shepherd? Because this is a German Shepherd track. So it's very important to treat those people fairly. And I'm all for compensation. I'm all for if a wolf continues to go after livestock, we have to get rid of that wolf. I have no objection to that. It's at a very low level. But I'd say the big issue right now is hunting and trapping of wolves. There's so much we could talk about that, but this year, the pack that I studied, quite a few of the members were killed in the hunt. And we knew that that was a possibility. We weren't surprised by that. So we just had to accept that as a cost that we were aware of doing the reintroduction. Wolves do reproduce fairly quickly, but it was the alpha male, along with several others from the Junction Butte pack. They recruited new males almost right away, so they bounced back, but it is something that we live with, and we've survived it for 30 years so far. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for sharing all your stories. I use them in my biology class yearly, and it still gets all of the kids' attention. I was curious as to whether you were asked to consult or advise on the wolf introduction at the Isle Royale in Michigan? And if so, what were some of the similarities
Mhm.
in the introduction and any changes or anything that you saw or did differently that you advised them on their introductions?
So the question was about what was happening in Isle Royale is many, many decades ago. A few wolves were actually able to swim from the mainland to the island. And so a lot of, before Yellowstone, that was one of the main wolf research areas in our country. And many of the people that ended up later, wolf biologists working in Denali, got their start there, such as Doug Smith and Mike Phillips. But then the problem was, being an isolated island, no new wolves were coming in. Actually, now that I think of it, they didn't swim, they crossed on the ice. And then with global warming, the ice bridge isn't there anymore. So as a high school kid could predict, there was a problem with genetics, so they were too closely related. It was controversial, but they eventually decided to bring in some new wolves from the outside, and that has helped. Um, I I've never actually been to Isle Royale, so I don't know if there's much more that I can say, other than my understanding is that they feel that's been very successful. They don't seem to be talking about the need to bring in, at least for the time being, more genetic diversity, but let's say they have that as an option. Um, does that, that's about the best I can do to cover your question. Okay.
Another one right here.
Rick, I read your book about '06 and I found it, such an amazing animal. You mentioned that she was killed in Montana and in Wyoming.
Yeah, Wyoming.
Okay,
Yeah.
she was killed because she came out of the park. And you mentioned that her death was known by a child. Didn't you do some children's programs? Can you tell us a little
Sure.
bit about that?
Yes, thank you. So the lady asked a question about '06, the main character in my book, the alpha female wolf. And boy, she was quite a girl. Yeah, we say that wolves have a matriarchal society, and boy, she was an absolute matriarch. You didn't mess with the '06 female. She was drop dead gorgeous, and all the boy wolves were after her. And she couldn't care less. She just rejected them left and right. And if they didn't leave her alone quick enough, she would just turn around and literally wipe the floor with them. Yeah. And they were too afraid of her to even try to fight back. Uh, there's a song by the band Heart where there's a line where the woman is saying to the no good boyfriend, if looks could kill, you'd be lying on the floor saying, please, baby, please, don't hurt me no more. Isn't that a great line? Yeah. And that pretty much summed up her relationship with the boys. But if in wolf language, her supposed boyfriend was to actually say something like that, I think she would beat him up twice as bad as usual. And then in wolf language, say to him, don't you ever call me baby. I'm not your baby. And then, she was courted by the biggest, toughest, most experienced, best looking males out there. And then when she was middle-aged, we thought she'd never settle down. There were two know-nothing brothers. They were yearlings, teenagers, like 15, 16 years old. And there was something about those guys that she liked. So that's who she picked. And we thought, was she hit in the head too many times? But all I'll say, and you'll have to, I guess, read the book to see what happened. She picked the right guy. She knew what she was doing. So whatever she did, she looked into their eyes and saw, these are guys that I'm going to be able to count on. And she was right, despite their youth and experience. Was there something else? Oh, yes. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for mentioning it. Yeah. So in the book, I end with a story where emotionally we were in great distress. She was shot by a hunter. When I said that she picked the right guys to pair off with her alpha male 755, he wouldn't leave her after she was shot. He would paw her to try to get her up. She was already dead. And the hunters who had killed her were actually coming to collect her. And he still wouldn't leave. They had guns in their hands. And boy, talking about being a faithful mate. And they decided they were so impressed by his courage that they backed off, the men. They had killed the wolf, but they wanted to give him some extra time with his mate. But they were required by sundown to turn her in. So only then did they come back. He still was there. And only very reluctantly, when the men with the guns just were right on top of him, did he finally walk away. Pretty good mate, huh? Yeah. Yeah. And he, so when she picked him, she looked into the future and she knew what she was doing. She picked the right guy.
Got two in this row for you. When you're observing the wolves, are they aware of your presence? Did they come to be familiar with you so they were acting normally around you, or did you have blinds or some way that you were trying not to interfere with them?
So myself, the other researchers, the wolf watchers, I would say we're an average of a mile away. And I think that's far enough. They can see us in the distance, but that doesn't seem to have an effect on them. We deliberately make a huge effort to not get closer because of the hunting. So if they got used to seeing us humans, let's say a few hundred yards from them, then they, in the hunting season, they wouldn't think of anything of people with guns being that close. So when I was a ranger, part of my job was to keep people a certain distance away. And I would get people arguing with me, but I would stand my ground. And I found that, and it was always someone with a camera. And I understand how, people want the pictures, but I found what was effective, if they weren't obeying me or paying any attention to me, you stand in front of them. So they're taking pictures of you now. Yeah. So there's a lot of pictures of me out there. Okay.
Yeah, I got two questions. The first one is there ever been a wolf attack on humans in the park? And the second one is, we're going back again to Yellowstone in July. Is there a better place to see them
Yes.
in the park?
Yeah, I'll answer the second question first. It looks like the main pack, the Junction Butte pack, is denning at Slough Creek. I'm there every morning, except this morning. And you're welcome to look for me. See if you can borrow, whatever, rent a spotting scope. The den is about a mile away. Pretty good chance you'll be able to see pups running around. And then the first part of your question? Okay, yeah, thanks for asking that. We've never had that in 30 years. I think, surprisingly, wolves see humans. They don't understand how we can do the things that we can do. So if they don't understand it, that means it's best to stay away from those things. They understand bison, they understand elk, they understand bears, but not us. We had two cases where we had strong evidence that people had been feeding two different wolves. And so one wolf would approach hikers. We're pretty sure with no ill intent, but hoping to get food. The other wolf had a different MO. It would chase pickup trucks. And we think that someone in a pickup truck had thrown an apple or a piece of meat and the wolf ate it, and then it figured if another truck comes along, it will do it. So I think we turned one of those wolves around in the behavior, the other one we couldn't, and we had to put it down. We just can't take a chance that a person would be hurt. It would be the worst possible thing.
We have a question online for you because we have several people watching you online. And the general theme of this question is about how wolves diversify how they hunt their prey and how they approach do they have to use their endurance and their stamina? Do they have to go long distances? And so do you have any stories to tell about observing wolves and hunting and potentially over long distance?
Yes, almost every day we see wolves on the hunt. They have a very, very high failure rate. So an average adult wolf is 100 pounds. A big bull elk is 700 pounds. A bull bison is 2,000 pounds. So they're fighting way, 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 way above their weight. In Marvel Comics, it would be like me fighting the Hulk. Not much of a chance. So wolves have evolved to be hunting in a group, hunting as a team. And what might happen is they're chasing an elk. And generally speaking, the fastest pack members are the young females, kind of the teenage females. So in an ideal situation, you have an elk that it has to be slower than average for this to work. So maybe the young female is running as fast as you can, 35 miles an hour. And if she can catch up with the elk and grab a hind leg, that's a huge thing for the pack because that her weight is going to act as a drag to slow the elk down. Other young females are going to catch up. They'll bite the other hind leg, so now there's more of a drag. And then it's probably going to be either the alpha male or the alpha female. It has to be a very experienced wolf. We got a phone somewhere. Or is that my, that's not mine. Whether it's the alpha male, the alpha female, or another older wolf, it doesn't matter. And this is the most dangerous thing to do, to get in front of the elk. If it's a bull with antlers, you could be stabbed to death in the chest, or the elk can rear up and trample you. You know, you think of a 700-pound animal coming down at you with rock hard hooves. But the trick is to dodge all that, and you pick the right moment. You leap up maybe 6 or 7 feet in midair, and you grab the throat like that. That's the killing bite. I think it's 1,500 pounds of pressure in their jaws. And of course, they have that long canine, so they would be puncturing the throat. So either through suffocation or great loss of blood, the animal will weaken, and then the other wolves will be pulling it down. But it's a dangerous life. You're trying to kill something that's 7 to 20 times bigger and stronger than you are. A pretty impressive feat. Anything else on the internet?
Yeah, just wanted to ask about whether there is a story of a wolf that you've observed that you think and hope that more people are like in the future.
That people would.
If a lesson you learned from a wolf that you think more people should learn.
Oh, a lesson I've learned from wolves that more people should learn. Yeah, that's an easy question. I've learned to say females are always correct. So if there are any men here, any husbands, anyone with a girlfriend, that's how life works. Face it, you're the one that's always wrong. She's the one that's always right. Do you agree with that?
I think the wolves have it figured out. Let's do one more question because Rick has some books to sign out there and he'll chat as he does.
I'm passing the mic down here. Can you take it past to Courtney?
I keep thinking about that teenage girl that made such an impactful difference for science and how hopeful that must have been for her and her career and her confidence. We have master's students from Miami University over here. Yes, they're amazing. I think a beautiful way to end this would be, this is the trickiest time to be in education and to be in conservation. What message of hope and what advice do you have that you could spread to all of us, but especially these amazing humans that are getting into this for the first time?
By the way, things have really dramatically changed in wildlife research. When I started out, it was the vast majority were men. And not many many women were going into it. Now I would say it's probably majority women. When I do talks for field trips from Montana State and University of Montana, oftentimes far and away, it's mostly women. I talked to a male supervisor a few years ago, and he told me straight out that women are just better at field work because they're used to detail work. So they're good at making observations, good at looking at data. I mentioned a woman on our staff, Kira Cassidy. She's especially adept at looking at very complicated reams and reams of data. She's the one that figured out that thing about if you have more older wolves, they're probably going to win. No guy ever thought of looking into that. So I'm very happy that that's the trend. I'm all for it. And the more women, the better. The wolves figured out a long time ago that the girls rule, and we're seeing that now in biology. Yeah, I think that there's a certain male bias. Guys think, oh, the biggest and the strongest wolf, he's obviously the one in charge. And we've talked about how the teenage girls saw through that mistake and say, well, yeah, but look at the smaller female there. Look at how she interacts with the big male. He does what he's told. So guys kind of can be blinded sometimes to things. No offense to anyone here, but it's really a fascinating thing for me to see this changeover. I'm all for it. Okay.
All right. So. So, Rick, thank you for a marvelous night. The night's still going to go with books, but it's also still going to go because you are the 2025 recipient of the Cincinnati Zoo Wildlife Conservation Medal. And I want to present that to you. It's disconnected, yeah. Our conservation award has over the years, starting in 1993, been given to the likes of Jane Goodall, Edward O. Wilson, Roger Torrey Peterson, George Schaller, and the list goes on. And we give it in gratitude and respect for the great work you've done with the wolves of Yellowstone. So thank you. Thank you all for coming. This is the 33rd year of the Barrows Conservation Lecture Series, and we have a lot of fun with it. It's an old-fashioned program, and I've had a lot of fun doing it for a long, long time. So thank you all.